Good afternoon. I'm going to offer you now just a little excerpt of our last in a series of 6. We had discussion afternoons looking at some works of art and seeing how they cross over with our understanding of our faith, with our desire to journey in faith with Jesus. It's been a great journey. There's only been a smallish number, 9 of us I think, who have been hanging in each week, but actually all of us returning week after week, because it's been a very rich time for us to learn alongside one another, to see things perhaps we'd not seen before, certainly in terms of works of art, but also actually in terms of insight, in terms of how we can encourage one another on this way of faith. And so now, as we come very near Easter, the theme for this last week is the crucifixion, a natural theme, of course, a theme that has been depicted again and again in classic art. The little picture to announce the series, to announce tonight's programme, was a work of art by Grunewald from the 16th century. But tonight we're going to be looking at 3 modern works of art. And so I'm going to play the recording of what I did earlier, not of the whole discussion, but just of a summary version of it. And I hope that you benefit from that. For this last session on the links between art and faith, the people who have been choosing these works of art have quite understandably gone to some portraits of the crucifixion. Here we are very much just on the cusp of marking Good Friday, and what we're going to see are, well, two paintings and also a sort of not so much a sculpture as just an assembly of materials, all of which depict something of the crucifixion. Now, they're interesting choices because all 3 of them, we're told, have actually been produced by Jews, and Jews who actually, as it happens, were not particularly Christian believers, but nevertheless captured not just by the story of Jesus being crucified, but by what it meant. Now, we're told in each of the Gospels, in Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, that when Jesus was crucified there was a sign affixed above his head. And one of the points that gets made in the commentary is that that sign was slightly differently remembered in all 4 of the Gospels. I mean, it basically said the same thing about this being Jesus, or this being Jesus, the King of the Jews, or this is the charge against Jesus, the King of the Jews, or this is Jesus, the Nazarene, King of the Jews. According to John's Gospel, it was even in 3 languages, in Hebrew and Greek and Latin. And Professor Quash, who holds all the things together, suggests that, well, if nothing else, there's an invitation for us to recognise that for everyone looking at Jesus on the cross, there are different things which are there to be pondered. There's a sense in which, for all that Jesus dying on the cross is a vital message for all of humanity, each and every human being has to see it, has to understand it. And that will be in quite particular ways. There are going to be particular things that strike you, and perhaps especially, for instance, if you're going through a time of suffering yourself, or aware of suffering in the world. What does it say to us that Jesus was put to death on a cross? And so these are 3 works of art which, each from the different perspectives of the artists, engage with how Jesus crucified speaks to our world, what it has to give to us. It's not as if any one picture, as it were, can say everything, any more than one formula or set of words can say everything. But we do benefit, all of us, by being alongside others, actually, by seeing how others have seen it, by hearing how others speak of it. let me show you these works of art. We're going to go firstly to a painting by the very distinguished artist Chagall. And here it is. It's a painting that was done in 1938. And as the commentary will tell us, and I'll play the commentary for you actually rather than just speak myself, this painting was done at a time when Chagall was so aware of the persecution and the trouble that Jews, like himself, Chagall was a Jew, were going through. And so as we zoom in on the painting, you see certainly Jesus is there, but around his loins is what looks like a Jewish prayer garment, complete with its fronds. And then in the top right corner there is a building on fire, but it's not just a building, it's a synagogue, because there are the Ten Commandments, these lions with a crown and the Star of David. This is a symbol of the Lion of Judah. And it's a little bit unclear whether this person is throwing the scrolls into the fire or trying to rescue them from the fire. Hints of a German flag up here and a swastika. And then Jewish figures, certainly a rabbi and others, floating as it were above the cross. Over here are revolutionary soldiers with their red flags, and again houses being burnt, people being left for dead, people escaping on boats. Possibly this referred back even to older persecutions than those that were happening actually in 1938, perhaps back to the Russian pogroms, I'm not sure. And then at the bottom, again, another figure trying to rescue one of the scrolls, or a figure there with a placard around his neck, not nailed to a cross, but forced to wear a placard, as Jews were in Nazi Germany. People are running for it. The Torah, the scrolls of scripture, are lying on the ground. Precious books have had to be abandoned. And below the cross is the menorah. These lights that were to burn in the presence of God, even with something of a halo around them. What was happening when Jesus was crucified? What was happening when there was such persecution of God's people? I'm going to come out of that just because I need to just click again to get the sound commentary, but let me just play you the sound commentary that there is available. Here it is. The Jewish Jesus.
The Jewish Jesus. Commentary by Amitai Mendelssohn. The year before the outbreak of the Second World War, Jewish artist Marc Chagall explicitly portrayed Jesus as an emblem of Jewish suffering. Surrounding the cross in White Crucifixion, 1938, we see Jews under threat in scenes of attack, destruction, and flight. White Crucifixion was painted in the context of synagogue burnings in Munich and Nuremberg in the summer of 1938, the expulsion of Polish Jews living in Germany that October, and finally the pogrom of November 1938, Kristallnacht, the Night of the Broken Glass, a foreshadowing of what would occur in Europe when war broke out. Chagall's decision to create a large picture, rather than, say, an intimate drawing, was influenced by the paintings of German anti-fascist artists who had already emphasised Jesus' Jewishness, but his main source of encouragement was more local. French support for this emphasis had grown following the publication in 1937 of a book by the French Jesuit Joseph Bonsevin, The Jews and Jesus, a book which used modern historical scholarship to reassert Jesus' Jewishness. Bonsevin cited the famous words of Israel Zangwill from his 1892 novel Children of the Ghetto. The people of Christ has been the Christ of peoples. Chagall was extremely aware of his target audience. Feeling that the Jews did not need to be told about the difficulty of their situation, they were experiencing it personally. He therefore sought the most effective way to bring Jewish suffering to the attention of Christians. Thus, he chose to invest the crucifixion, their most distinctive and most profound image, with Jewish content. He believed that Christians would understand the message of Jesus' Jewishness from the prayer shawl girding his loins, the menorah surrounded by a halo of light that echoes Jesus' halo, and the shtetl scenes of persecution. Above the cross, Chagall reproduced the words said to be on Pilate's placard in John 19:19, Jesus the Nazarene, King of the Jews. He did so in Aramaic, the language that Jesus, like most Jews of his day, probably spoke. Many years later, Chagall's approach proved more successful than the artist might have expected. Pope Francis I spoke of his affinity for this Jewish portrayal of Jesus and called White Crucifixion his favourite painting.
It's interesting, that particular work of art, we as a group certainly found it easy to understand, and perhaps that was the point actually. Chagall painted it so that people would understand. That Christians who hadn't appreciated what all was happening to the Jews in Europe in 1938 should understand. The sad thing is that there were many who did not understand, or who did nothing. Rather like the time when Jesus was crucified and people passed by. Now this next work of art is rather different. You can see that really what it is it's a hanging of pieces of cloth and items, a bag, a sort of a bicycle chain really, cloth, fabric, particular fabric, and then up at the top these horizontal sticks and what is actually really just a trunk, a bit of a tree trunk, but you can see that it's stained with crimson. There's crimson staining here, there's crimson staining here. It is suggesting the crucifixion, even though it is a collection of objects and things. And this was done in the 1980s by an artist who felt very strongly that what was happening to the Arabs, the Bedouins, in modern-day Israel was so awful. They were being persecuted, they were being killed. The whole structure of this is up against a piece of solid metal, as if there is no feeling, no thought going on as to how these people's lives were being torn apart. In the commentary, I probably won't bother playing the electronic commentary this time, they talk about these horizontal poles as being actually very like the poles that the Bedouin used to hold up their tents, to use as tent poles. And the other thought that gets offered in the commentary is that whereas this modern artist was really wanting us to consider what was happening to the Bedouin people in modern-day Israel, why were they being so persecuted, driven from their homes, denied a place to be and to flourish? This artist was also influenced by a very famous medieval painting, and I'm going to just bring that up for you just to show you the difference. Here we are. This is a very famous medieval painting. Oops, maybe I haven't shared that successfully. Let me just try and get you up what I'm talking about. Here we are. A very famous medieval painting by an artist called Grunewald, and it's... Do you see how the figure of Christ, and in a way the shape of the whole thing, was slightly repeated in that modern version? And one of the interesting things about this painting, which dates from the 1510s, is that it was made for a particular chapel, St. Anthony's Chapel, and where they were treating people who were suffering in a particularly gruesome and hard way. And actually the figure of Christ has been has been painted as if he also had the same illness, the same disease that the people in that hospital chapel would have been suffering. In other words, for those who suffer to see in Christ the same sort of suffering, that's really what the artist is reaching for. So, with that Bedouin portrayal, it's the same sort of idea. Think what's going on. See what's going on in our world, as if Christ is being crucified again. And then the last picture is another very interesting one. I don't know about you, but it struck me as if this was really quite a classic painting of the crucifixion, although it's a modern piece of art, and somehow just, it's maybe a personal taste thing, but certainly for me it's very expressive, very powerful. Maybe it's just the use of the paint or the colour, the gauntness of the figure being crucified. A cross, a real cross, would never have been geometrically carved or worked on by a joiner. It was simply a piece of wood against tree. But this artist who painted it in 1948, I'm just trying to remember his name. Just let me, oops, sorry, I'm going the wrong way. Let me, let me get back to where we are. The artist is Moshe Kastel. Now, what we're told about Moshe Kastel, really, we need to be told the story in order to understand this. Moshe Kastel painted this when he was trying to find himself. He was staying in a monastery in 1948. Now, he was a Jew, so there he was in Christian company. But Moshe Kastel, his wife, had died. And 3 years after his wife had died, his daughter had died. And he was utterly broken. So what he chose to do, he sketched out pictures of the crucifixion, and he had originally on the nameplate above Jesus the name Yeshua, Jesus in Hebrew. But then in this final painting, he changed what was written above, and he wrote Kastel, the Jew. He wrote his own name, and actually the face apparently is his face. It was as if he was wanting just to picture himself on the cross. He found, thinking about Jesus having been crucified on the cross, he found there a way of expressing what he was feeling. His lostness, his sense of God-forsakenness, his suffering because the wages of sin is death. It's powerful painting, isn't it? As I say, these three paintings together, inviting us to just keep on looking at the cross and to recognize that there are others who look at the cross and others who suffer in our world. And we need to attend to their sufferings. And to believe and to hope and to pray for God to bring rescue for them as for us. Jesus died for us all. These are three Jewish artists, as it happens. Jews, of course, can be Christians, but I think we're told that, as it happens, none of these Jewish artists were Christians at the time that they painted, but nevertheless drawn by the story of the crucifixion, drawn by this so grim moment, to contemplate what happens in this world of sin, what goes wrong, what goes so horribly wrong. And might we yet hope in God. I'm offering just in these short summaries only something of what we did when we were all together, but I hope that's been helpful for you, just to see a little bit of how looking at different works of art, some of them definitely outside our comfort zone, or things that we might never have seen, things that we might never see in the flesh, they are, all of them, helping us. Well, Jesus was very strong about having the eyes to see what matters, what truly matters. Because sometimes those of us, even with our eyes, we are blind. Those of us, even with our ears, we are deaf. It is the truth which will set us free. We need to have our eyes open and our ears open to all that happens in our world, and then most certainly to all that God, in his amazing grace, through Jesus Christ, has done, is doing still, will do, into the peace of eternity. I hope you have a very joyful celebration of Easter.